Welcome to our 84th podcast for Thanks for Your Service. Our focus is on historical topics relating to the Australian military. You can find us on Facebook, X and YouTube. Just search for Thanks for Your Service, and our website is www.thanksforyourservice.net. You can also email us at info@thanksforyourservice.net. Referred to as the Forgotten War, thousands of Australians, from servicemen and women, news correspondents, war artists, Qantas crew and volunteers such as Red Cross nurses served in the Burma campaign during World War II. Andrew Kilsby and Daryl Moran co-edited a book on aspects of our involvement in the Forgotten War. Joining us on the line from Melbourne in Victoria is Dr. Daryl Moran, and we're here to talk about one of the books that he's co-edited. So the book is titled In the Fight, Australians in the War in Burma 1942 to 1945, and the book covers many chapters in what you describe as forgotten men and women from Australia in a forgotten war. Why were they forgotten?
I think they were forgotten for a few reasons. One, Australia officially had no involvement. There were no RAAF squadrons. There were some army units, some commandos, as we can talk about, but they were there in 1941, before the Japanese even attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, the Navy had ships going up and down as well. They were the constant presence from an official Australian perspective. So consequently, Burma is not even a blip on the radar as far as most Australians are concerned, Kokoda, all that sort of stuff, and quite rightly so. But General Field Marshal Slim, he made the point. He was in charge of the whole campaign, and he told them when he got there to organise the British Army, he said, you tell me that you're the forgotten army. Well, you're not forgotten. No one even knows you're here. And they thrived a little bit on that. So I think that what we've tried to do through In the Fight is we've highlighted the work that range of people did. So we covered 12 chapters in the book, which were 12 discrete areas of involvement that, quite frankly, Andrew, my co-editor, and I knew virtually nothing about.
Yeah.
If I might just give not the political plug, but just to put Burma into context. So in terms of statistics, the Burma campaign was the longest campaign fought by the Allies in World War II, over arguably the largest area of the Earth's surface, from Ceylon to Vietnam and Eastern China. And by 1945, provided the largest army group that the British Commonwealth ever assembled in its entire history.
Do we have any idea, and I know it might be difficult to come to a numbers answer, but do we have any idea of how many Australians in their various roles served in the Burma theatre of war during World War II?
Yeah, look, everyone who served there received the Burma Star. And as best as records tell us, the numbers are about 5,000 spread across the three services and across war correspondents, et cetera, who are there. So it's about 5,000. But nowhere in Canberra could we find an official list of people who received the Burma Star. So we know that there were 1,700 Air Force people. We know there were about 40 or 50 Army, and the rest were Navy, who were, going up and down doing one thing and another. So let's put that into context, that there were about 1.3 million Allied servicemen and women. So Australia's contribution on that scale is reasonably small.
Yeah.
But still pretty important.
Now, in your book, each chapter covers a different aspect of Australia's involvement in the Burma campaign, and perhaps you can give us a brief overview of some of the content. For example, if we start off with Chapter 5 covers the air war, and is it fair to say that the weather and illness took a heavier toll than combat?
Yes, it did, because the conditions were incredibly unique. I lived in India for a few years and experienced the monsoon. And over on that east coast of India and into Burma, flying was virtually impossible from March to October. So the Japanese often took all of their air force and retreated to Thailand and didn't do any flying, simply because you just couldn't. A key turning point for the Allies was that Mountbatten, the Supreme Commander, said, well, blow that, we're going to fly. And so they did, and that helped. But it was absolutely treacherous conditions. I can just give you 3 examples of the weather. So there were many examples of planes flying through these huge cumulonimbus clouds and having all of the paint stripped off the fuselage, so such ferocity with the wind and the rain. We know that one of the worst disasters occurred to Spitfire pilots when they were flying back from Burma to India on leave. These were some of the most decorated pilots, DFCs, all that sort of stuff. 5 of them went missing in the monsoon. Some of them never seen again. But right up, the final example is way up. We often forget that the Allies were supplying the Chinese army, Chiang Kai-shek's army, up in Western China, Kunming. And the only one, because the Burma Road was blocked, the Japanese held Burma, they had to fly transports across the Himalayas. Now, the Americans and the British were doing this, and there were many Australians involved as pilots, navigators, or whatever. Of course, these were all unarmed Dakota planes. You couldn't fit guns on them. But there were no charts when they first started. They just sort of said, oh, here's a compass heading, you'll find Kunming. Well, the weather was so horrendous that the flight path eventually became known as the Aluminium Trail. And the pilots knew if they got lost in daylight, they just had to look for the glint of wrecked aeroplanes along the Himalayas, and they'd eventually find their way to Kunming. So the weather was unbelievable. The same for the troops on the ground. The conditions were beyond believable.
Goodness.
Weather incredible for aircraft.
Chapter 6 is titled Warships, the Royal Australian Navy and the War at Sea. For example, HMAS Vampire. I didn't know that the wreck to this date has still not been located.
No, the Navy have had a number of searches, but it would appear that the area it went down has gone into one of those incredibly deep trenches and just never to be seen again. It's just so far down that they just can't locate it. Again, the Vampire and its story has not really been told, and it was part of history because the HMS Hermes, which was the British aircraft carrier that it was escorting and accompanying, they were both attacked by Japanese planes. And the Japanese Zeros and planes from the Japanese fleet sank the Hermes. And then they turned their attention to the Vampire. The Hermes was the first aircraft carrier in history to be sunk by aircraft from another aircraft carrier. A little piece of history.
Ooh. Chapter 9 is titled Double Sunrise, Qantas Across the Indian Ocean. I mean, who knew the role that Qantas had played in the theatre as well? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Qantas in recent times hasn't always been everyone's favourite airline, but they set up in June 1943 this amazing long-distance flight from Perth to Lake Cogula, which is just south of Colombo in Ceylon. Now, it's a flight of over 3,000 miles non-stop. So you can imagine the skill that was involved. It took close to 30 hours one way. And it eventually became a vital link because they were able to transport mail, important passengers, documents, etc., that they needed, that the Allies needed to get to Australia or vice versa. We believe the facilities were absolutely Spartan. Everything was stripped out because, of course, you needed to have less weight and more fuel. So all of the passengers wore wool-lined boots and flying suits, and they had to wear silk gloves because if they touched the metal surface of the plane, their hands would stick to it because it was up so high. But between 1943 and 1945, Qantas flew 260 of these flights, carried over 600 passengers, and never lost an aircraft in all that time. An amazing record.
Yeah. The role of women in the theatre is prominent throughout the book, and chapter 10, women at the front, the Waspies, is that the correct pronunciations? To tell us about a Waspie.
Well, when Andrew and I were researching, we discovered that in Rangoon, or now called Yangon, there is a war memorial with the names of, servicemen who were killed, etc., etc. But there's one Australian woman whose name is there. And she was one of these, what was called Waspies. So the story is a quite remarkable thing. As the Japanese were coming in to Burma from the east, the British are retreating, and these plucky, doughty British women, a number of Australian women amongst them, they were secretaries or they were wives of planters or whatever, decided that they needed to do something to support the troops. And so in true fashion, they convinced the authorities that the men needed practical support. So the British Army gave them large trucks and a driver and a guard, and they drove around the back lines providing coffee and tea and cocoa and bacon and eggs, sandwiches, etc. And there's often records of fighting happening half a mile up the road, and the Waspies are there doing their thing. There were many instances, again, of troops leaving notes, Waspies, please call. The effect on morale of seeing women from home so close to the front lines was quite a remarkable thing. They did a magnificent job. You can imagine the conditions that they were living under, going from position to position to position. But again, they were clearly told their job was morale boosting. You smile at the troops, you're happy, etc., 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 and you're providing all of these things no matter what. A number of them were decorated after the war. Mountbatten himself said what a magnificent job they did, not only in providing comfort for the troops and food and provisions, but the morale aspect was unbelievable. And a number of Australian women were part of that effort. Who's ever heard of that? When we launched the book last year at the Shrine, 3 women of senior years appeared, one of them wearing medals. And when we talked, we discovered that these were the daughters of one of the Waspies who'd only died the year before, aged 101.
Goodness.
And they said until they read the book, they hadn't really understood what Mum had been doing in Burma, for goodness sake.
Wow. Okay. And chapter 12, it is chapter 12, R.G. Casey. And my only knowledge of Casey was DFAT has a building named after him in Canberra. So another Australian, another angle into the war. Tell us about R.G. Casey.
Yeah. Look, leaving politics aside, whether you're Labor supporter or Liberal supporter, neither here nor there, he was an outstanding Australian diplomat of his time, and he had served in World War One, and he was actually selected as a British cabinet minister in 1942, and he served there. And then Churchill asked him to take on the governorship of Bengal in 1944. And this was quite an amazing appointment, because when Casey took on the appointment, he was the highest paid Australian in the world. He was even paid more than Churchill for the job. It was a little bit of a poison chalice because, of course, Bengal was still under some attack from Japanese. And, of course, the famine was occurring. This terrible famine was taking place in Bengal. And Churchill and Casey and the British are often blamed. History is a little vague, but it would appear that there were conditions in place, long-standing conditions, whereby the traders and merchants were hoarding lots of grain, not giving it out, not selling it, etc. As I said, I lived in India. Red tape is the national sport. And it took him a long time to achieve the things that he wanted to do. He managed to achieve a number of things, because rather than just sitting in the governor's residence, he went out and about. People were shocked to see him walking the streets. And you know what? That's what Australians would do. They'd get out and see the situation and summarise it, etc. Tragically, 3 million people died during the Bengal famine, and we know that Casey did his absolute best. He was a star in his humanitarian approach to the way that things should be happening. But Professor Karma McLean, who wrote that chapter, an Australian, she's the professor of history at Heidelberg University in Germany, and she is virtually the world's expert on Casey. And she says, without a shadow of a doubt, he's been unfairly blamed for things that happened and things that didn't happen, and he really comes out of it very, very humanely. He tried to work really well with it.
Yeah,
circumstances not always in his favour.
Yeah, you co-edited this book with Andrew Kilsby, who couldn't join us for today's podcast. But what did you take into consideration when you were selecting the chapter subjects?
I think we wanted to make sure that where possible, we were telling those untold stories. So, for example, the Wasbies, for example, that there were volunteer aid detachments and Australian nurses who were on Ceylon doing their thing. We didn't quite have the opportunity to deal with the Australian women who were working for Special Operations Executive in Burma and India, doing all sorts of, they were called cypherettes, doing all sorts of things. We didn't quite get to them, but we were keen to find those untold stories. So we uncovered sports people, for example, and we know that there was a former Test cricketer, Ross Gregory, who was killed, a former VFL footballer who was killed. And again, Ian Wilkinson, who wrote the chapter, uncovered the fact that cricket was happening all through the war. The British or the English were playing any Australian they could find on Air Force bases. And towards the end of the war, Keith Miller and others played the victory test in England, and then they were sent to India and did exactly the same thing. And they toured throughout India playing all sorts of cricket. They were having a pretty nice time, thank you very much, as well. But when they got back to Australia, Keith Miller and those reported what a fantastic standard of cricket was happening in India. The following year, India brought out a test team of sorts, but it's from there, those tests, that India then entered the test cricket scene as a result of these wartime matches. Quite a remarkable thing. Commandos, we found instance of commandos being in the Burma theatre in 1941, before the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor. And these Australian commandos, about 50 of them, were part of a larger force who went up the Burma Road into Western China to train the Chinese nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek's army, in guerrilla warfare. It didn't work out enormously well for a variety of reasons, the language difficulties, etc., etc. So eventually they were all taken out, but as I say, they were certainly there doing what they had to do. Yeah.
And for you, this is not your first book in relation to Australian military history. So what was is at least one more book for you?
Yes. I've written a book called Empire's Noble Son, which deals with the exploits of a World War I combat pilot from Melbourne, who served with 11 Squadron in the Royal Flying Corps. Battle of the Somme, Military Cross, personally decorated by the King, if you don't mind. Sadly killed in a training accident. And just yesterday, I submitted another book to a publisher, which deals with the lives of 28 young Australians who served in the Boer War. I've had access to their files and records. A lot of them were Caulfield grammarians. And again, I've been able to put that together. So that's called First to Serve and Sacrifice. And we're hoping to get that out before Christmas.
Yeah.
And then, as we mentioned earlier, Andrew and I just finished writing Resolute.
So you guys have been busy, and Resolute is coming out next month, which is October 2025. Tell us about that. So Resolute is the story of the RAAF, or Australians in the air war in Burma. Again, who knew that Australians were there? We uncovered about 1,700 who served there. Some were part of the RAF already before the war, but some through the Empire Air Training Scheme were dragooned is the wrong word, but they were
sent to RAF squadrons, and they ended up right from the very early days of the war. So the Japanese invade Burma just before Christmas 1941, and there are Australians there right from the get-go in various squadrons. By the end of the war, the RAF has about 85 squadrons. There, Australians are in all of them. There are some Australians who were wing commanders who were leading British squadrons. We know that about close to 300 were killed in the Burma campaign. So we've compiled a nominal roll. We've found the name of every man who served there. We've compiled it, well, as best we can. No list is ever completely complete, but we've done our best. 1,700 names, all their decorations, the deaths, etc. And we've noted the prisoners, because when we think of Burma, we think of Thai-Burma Railway, terrible, awful. But there were 17 Australians who were imprisoned in the Rangoon jail, 14 of them airmen, 3 of them commandos, part of that earlier force. So they had a pretty terrible time. So Resolute runs to 523 pages, and quite frankly, in the official history after World War II, there are 32 pages devoted to the Burma campaign. So we feel that we've done our best here to tell their story. We've tried very hard. Obviously, you can't tell everyone's story, but we tried hard to note every death and the circumstances of every death. We feel that's very important for families. And we know that at the launch on the Shrine and on October 19, we have a number of descendants who are coming. They're telling us the first time Australia has actually officially acknowledged the service of those who served in Burma. It wasn't until 1990 that the word Burma was added to the Australian War Memorial, and it still doesn't exist at the Shrine.
Yeah.
And again, we need to remember, when they came home, these poor blokes had nowhere to go on Anzac Day, no one to work with, and eventually they formed the Southeast Asia Command. Mountbatten himself gave it their approval, designed the badge, etc., and they marched. They've all gone now. One of the banners is in the Western Australian Bull Creek RAAF Museum. So we're looking forward to that, because we feel for a lot of them it'll be closure. A lot of the families, it'll be closure.
And that book launch is at the Shrine in Melbourne on the 19th of October. People can still buy tickets to go along.
They can, yes. So they just go to the Shrine website and they can book. I think it's $10, which covers tea and biscuits, etc. But most importantly, at the end, so it's 3:00 in the afternoon, and at 4:45, there is the last post ceremony, which will be particularly poignant and special, because it's almost 80 years to the day since the RAAF came through the heads on the ship, the Sante, and landed in Melbourne and returned back to life, as normal as that can be, having been in Burma and India.
Goodness. And now the most important question of the day: where can listeners buy your books?
The book is available already on Amazon. It's available through Big Sky, our publishers. It's available at Dymocks, all Dymocks stores, QBD, Collins bookshops, and also Big W, and all of those shops right across Australia. I've come to learn Big W are the largest bookshop in Australia. And so this is going to be carried right across the country. So we're particularly pleased.
Great. Well, always a pleasure to talk. And I look forward to the next time we talk, which will be about Resolute. And Daryl, always great. Thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure, David. Thanks very much.
That's the podcast for today. Daryl and Andrew's next book, titled Resolute, The Australian Air War in Burma, 1942 to 1945, is being launched at the Melbourne Shrine of Remembrance on 19th of October 2025, and tickets are available on the Shrine website. We're keen to hear your feedback by leaving a review on your podcast app. Your reviews helps new listeners find our podcast. If you have any special requests or suggestions for our podcast, please get in touch. And you can help support this podcast via Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. The links are on our website and Facebook page, and your support helps us with the production of this podcast. Do you have a relative who have served in the Australian military? Our family military history research packages sources records to better understand the service and experience of those who've served. You can find out more information on our website. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your service.